Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's PREA training session, Rape is Not Part of the Prison Sentence, with survivor expert and advocate, Jan Lastocy. Today's training is the final part of a 4-part webinar series focusing on better serving incarcerated survivors. This training session is hosted by the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or MCASA for short. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Alyssa Garagiola, and I'm the Training and Community Engagement Policy Advocate at MCASA. MCASA is a federally recognized state sexual assault coalition. We represent Maryland's 17 rape crisis centers and many other professionals throughout the state who work to respond to and prevent sexual assault. Before we begin, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items to make sure we're all on the same page. First, closed captions have been enabled. You can access them by going to the bottom of your screen and clicking on the closed caption button. If you do not see that button, try looking for 3 dots at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, a little menu will pop up and you can access closed captions that way. Second, if at any point during the presentation you have questions, please use the Q&A box or the chat box. We will be monitoring the chat for questions throughout, and we will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation where you can also come off mute and verbally ask your questions. To do this, please use the raise hand button so that way we can unmute you. Third, today's webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a copy of the recording and a follow-up email. Finally, towards the end of the presentation, I will be posting an evaluation into the chat. We strongly encourage all feedback as we are constantly striving to improve our training programs. This evaluation is anonymous, and if you fill it out, you will gain access to the certificate request form where you can get a certificate for attending this training session. I think that's everything. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jan. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. First of all, I want to thank MCASA and Alyssa and Grace and Stephanie and everyone there for inviting me to do this. I'm hoping that all of you can learn a little something. To start with, can you look at me and know that I was in prison? Can you look at me and know that I've been raped? Well, the answer to both of those is yes. I've been in prison and I was raped. I was raped while I was in prison, in a Michigan prison. On my 37th birthday, I was sentenced to 18 months to 10 years for attempted embezzlement. And I did just what I used to tell the judge I worked for I would do. They dragged me out of there kicking and screaming and crying. I was not prepared for that sentence. I was a 37-year-old married middle-class woman with a husband and kids and didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't think I could survive it. But it's amazing what you can do. And I spent 7 days in the county jail, and then they came over my intercom and said, pack up, you're heading to prison. So I packed up, I went to prison. It was a 2.5-hour ride. And the first thing that happened was when I got in there, they made me send my wedding ring back home. They took it off because it had a stone on it and I couldn't have it. It had been in my hand for almost 18 years at that point in time. That was really hard. I gave it to the deputies that brought me and they returned it to my husband. And then I was a prisoner. I was prisoner number 263370. And it was a culture shock, to say the least. The first 7 days I spent in what they called cord, where you learn the rules, you get everything taken care of, and you get assigned to where you're going to be permanently in the prison. I wasn't allowed to talk to my family. I wasn't allowed, you're not allowed to do anything. You have to literally hold up a roll of toilet paper when you need to use the bathroom. I was lucky in that I met a lady when I was in intake who was on her third trip to prison, and she taught me the ropes. She kept me alive. She told me, whatever you do, don't let them see you cry. Cry in your cell if you have to, but never ever cry out in public where anybody else can see you. So I learned a lot. I became hard very quick, but you have to survive. And then after I'd been in the prison for 2 months, I got transferred to a work camp. And my friend Peggy got transferred with me. So that was great. Once you get to the work camp, then you go through everything there again. And due to my past history of secretarial work and everything, they made me a clerk at the warehouse that handled the men's prison. And I'd been working there for 2 or 3 weeks. And it was great because you got to leave the prison every day. I wasn't surrounded by a fence. I had access to a typewriter again. Yes, old school, I know, but I had access to a typewriter. And I worked with a couple really great guys. They didn't treat me like some people treat prisoners. They treated me like a human being that had made a mistake. And just before I went to prison, actually, I had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So that luckily explained why I'd been doing some of the things I'd been doing. It didn't excuse them. I'm not saying it did, but it explained them. So I'd been at the warehouse for a couple weeks when they told me we're going to get a new employee. He was going to work in the men's prison in the morning and come to the warehouse in the afternoon. Didn't like him from the beginning. Just something about him, kind of creepy, you know. Always asking questions about my personal life at home with my husband, things like that. He was always telling nasty, dirty jokes, just kind of a creepy guy. In fact, one of the other girls that was working in the warehouse with me, when they would take us back to the prison at the end of the day, if he was the one to take us back, we would fight over who had to sit next to him in the truck. One day he came into the dry goods room where I was working, and that's where we kept all the cake batter and cookie batter and the dry foods and everything. And he told me that he'd waited long enough. And I said, waited long enough for what? And he said he decided that he wanted a blowjob. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he said, yes, you are. Or do I have to get my pen out? Which, for anybody who knows anything about the prison system, means he's going to write me a ticket. So I did what he told me to do. And when I was done, I went to the bathroom and threw up. And I thought it was done. The next day at work, he came in again and he said he decided he wanted more than just a blowjob. He wanted sex. I tried crying. I tried talking about my kids. I tried telling him, you don't want to do this. This is rape. You'll get in trouble. And he said, who do you think they're going to believe, you or me? And I said, I can't. And he made me take my clothes off and raped me in the dry goods room. Now, when I came into the work camp, the warden did her little intro speech, and she let it be known that if anyone ever had an issue with an officer, that she would always believe the officer over the prisoner. So I knew there was no way I could tell anybody. Nobody was going to believe me. I was just a prisoner. And so I made the decision to not tell anybody because I didn't want to lose my date to go home. I knew I was leaving in December, and I knew that a major ticket from him could change that date. So I just basically made the decision that I was going to let him continue to rape me. So for the next 6 months, that's what he did. Several times a week, in the dry goods room, in the freezer, in the caustics room, wherever he wanted. And anytime I tried to say no, he always said, "Do I need to get my pen out?" Then came the day that I was put on a bus and sent home. And when I walked out of the prison, I just kind of put it in the back of my mind and buried it and never thought about it again. Then came 2 years later, and I was reporting to my parole officer, and his phone rang. And he said, "As a matter of fact, she's sitting across from me." And my stomach hit the floor. And he said, put the call on hold. And he said, "That's internal affairs. They want to talk to you, but they want to talk to me first." And I'm like, "Why?" And he said, "Did you ever have a ticket or anything that wasn't settled?" And I said, "I got one ticket when I was in because I left my cup on my bed." And I seriously considered running when he sent me to the lobby, but I didn't. And so I waited, and I went back in, and he said, "Did you ever have any?" He said, "You worked at the prisoner store, right?" "No, I worked at the men's warehouse across the parking lot from the prisoner store." "Did you ever have any trouble with any of the employees?" And I knew what he was talking about. And I burst into tears. And scared the daylights out of my parole officer to the point he slowly shoved a box of Kleenex across the desk at me. And I picked up the phone and I talked to the gentleman from Internal Affairs, where I learned that one of the inmates, incarcerated persons, whichever, had been raped by the same individual, but she had gotten some DNA and taken it back to the prison. So the warden couldn't deny it. Well, then that meant that they had to backtrack to see if it had happened to any of the other people that were working there. And they finally got to me. So I was the first of his victims, but apparently not his last. So then started all of the meetings. I had to meet with Internal Affairs. They finally brought charges. He decided to resign from his position. I had to meet with the prosecutor, and then he started playing his games once he got charged. We had to get a special prosecutor in. They had to do all kinds of things. So I had to meet with another prosecutor. The prosecutor we ended up with from a local county was amazing. He didn't treat us like we were prisoners. He treated us like we were people. And Then we started the waiting game to get him to trial. He did everything from his grandma was sick, his dad was sick, I think his cat had a hangnail. We rescheduled the trial 5 times till finally the judge said, we're not doing it anymore. We're going to trial. So we had the trial. I was going to be the first witness for a couple of reasons. One, I'd only been to prison once in my life. Still true to this day. So I knew the day I went to prison. I knew the day I went to the work camp. I knew all my dates. Some of the women had been there so many times they couldn't even remember. The prosecutor thought I might be on the stand for maybe a couple hours. I went on after the state police detective and the internal affairs guy, and I was on just after lunch on Monday, all Monday afternoon. I've never been so emotionally exhausted in my life. And then I had to go back on Tuesday, and I was on most of the day Tuesday. His lawyer tried everything he could to rattle me, to get me to admit that I had made this up with the other women. I said, I don't even know these other women. It was a rough week and a half. I'm not going to bore you with all the details of the trial, but we ended up with a mistrial. And I lost it. So they had to appeal it. We did win the appeal. And we went to go back to trial again. And we were sitting there and waiting and waiting. And the defendant didn't show up. And they finally sent somebody to his house, and he was gone. And I fell asleep or fell apart. I totally lost it. I think I screamed at the prosecutor and said, I told you you should revoke his bond. If we did, this would have been done a lot sooner. I think I might have used a few cuss words. And I resigned myself to the fact that he was never going to get tried for this. And I told the state police detective, I said, they're not going to look for him. We're just prisoners. And he said, we'll find him. And I kind of believed him, but, but as time went on and they didn't find him, I figured they weren't even looking. And then one day, about 9 months later, I got a phone call and they had located him. Now, I'm in Michigan. This is where it happened, where he lived. And they found him in Alaska. So he'd left. He'd gone quite a ways away. But they found him and they brought him back, put him in EDSEG, because he was scared that they were going to hurt him because he used to work at the prison. And we got ready for a trial again. Only this time, the other victims didn't want to go to trial. They wanted to just plead it out and be done. I didn't. I wanted a full-blown trial. I wanted him to pay. So they made a plea deal, and he ended up with 5 years. That's it. Although I have to consider myself lucky because, as I'm sure most of you know, in this case, and this was long before PREA, they kept their jobs. They didn't get in trouble. So it was very, very rare to have a conviction. So we went down for the sentencing, and I told him what a disgusting human being he was, how I was glad he was going to prison, where he would now be told what to do, when to do it, where to do it, and how to do it. But I also said that what I didn't wish on him was that he would be raped like he had done to me, because nobody deserves that. Rape is not part of the sentence. Now, as I said, this was back in 1998. He was finally convicted in 2003. So long before PREA. Once I had told my husband, and all this came to the front, it was quite evident I needed to seek some counseling. So I did. I started with our local Y because, of course, the Ys are well known for their rape crisis treatment. And everything went great. Told my story, kind of. Left out the fact that it happened in prison. And then one day, while I was talking, I brought up the fact that it had happened in prison. And boy, did things change. Everybody treated me different, like they were afraid of me. And that's when I realized that people had a different mindset. And it was almost like it was okay to rape somebody that was in prison. And I knew that wasn't the case at all, because rape is rape no matter where it happens. So I started Googling one day to see if I could find any other prison rape survivors. And I found a group that at that point in time was called Stop Prisoner Rape. So I reached out to them. They were out in LA. And for the first time, I found somebody who, I can't say knew what I was going through, but felt for what I went through. Their name has been changed. They are now called Just Detention International. And they are the only organization in the world whose sole purpose is to put an end to prisoner rape. I still can't wrap my head around the fact that it's illegal to rape somebody in the free world, but it's not illegal to do it to somebody in prison. And yes, PREA has made a big difference, but still too many times, even with PREA, the person who commits the crime does not get punished. And too many times they still don't even lose their jobs. So we've come a long way with PREA, but we still have a really, really, really long way to go. My husband and I testified in front of Congress. We told our story because, yes, it's not just my story, it's also his. Like I said, at that point in time, we were married 18 years. We've now been together for 43 years. Yes, he stuck with me through it. Don't know why. It's been a rough road, but I know he's always been my biggest supporter and my rock. He's become involved with helping me. I've become an advocate. I refuse to be called a victim because I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. I survived what he did to me. I did not let it take over my life or ruin my life. And I will be damned if I will let him win. And I now go around to our local jails and talk to both the employees and the incarcerated people and let them both know they have jobs, they have rights, and it's not okay for somebody to rape you. It doesn't matter if you're in prison. It doesn't matter if you're in a correction center or halfway house or wherever you are. Rape is not okay. I know that my husband worked for our local road commission, and he was also a firefighter for 30 years. So we knew a lot of police officers. Our son's godfather was a sergeant on the sheriff's department. I didn't know this really happened. I thought it happened in the movies. He didn't know it happened. He said he thought with me going to prison, at least I would be safe. And he had to deal with, knowing that while he was thinking I was safe, this was happening. And I remember when I first told him, he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I said, "But I did. I wrote you hundreds of letters. Never mailed any of them. Tore up and burned every one of them." That was back when you could still smoke in the prisons. And because I knew if I sent out a letter, they would read it and there'd come a ticket. I've met a lot of other survivors. Some of them, it's ruined their whole lives. They can't function. They can't get past what happened to them. Meeting some of them is when I decided, no, because he wins, and I'm not going to let him win. Yes, I still check the Alaska Sex Offender Registry. I was checking it every week. Then I went to every month to make sure he's still compliant and that he's still there, to be honest. One day I was at a store and I saw someone who looked a whole lot like him, and I flipped out. This was probably 6 or 8 months after he'd been released from prison. And I left my cart of groceries and ran out the door. It wasn't him, but seeing somebody that looked so much like him set me off. So I knew I needed more counseling. The why hadn't worked, so I had to find somebody else. It took probably 3 more counselors before I found somebody who wasn't afraid of me. Because big bad prisoner here. It's very hard to get counseling for being raped when you know your counselor is too afraid of you. With PREA, yes, it shouldn't happen. But we shouldn't even need PREA for it to not happen. But it helps. I still don't believe the numbers that DOJ puts out when they say 216,000 people are assaulted sexually in our prisons every year. That's only the ones that talk about it. Because I'm sure if they had come to me and said, "Is anything happening?" I'd have said, "Nope." I think that number's a whole lot higher. I think it's still a whole lot higher, even with PREA. Another problem that we run into is too many of the incarcerated don't know that they have rights. They don't know they have a right to a forensic exam. They just don't know. I don't know why they're not being told. One of the jails that I work with had made up flyers, and one was for the employees, one was for vendors, one was for everybody that came into lockup got one. And it told what PREA was, what their rights and responsibilities were, because even the inmates have rights and responsibilities. And that was a big help, because if something did happen, then the person who did it should know what's going to happen to them or could happen to them. It let a lot of the inmates stop being afraid of retaliation from other, if it was a corrections official that did it, they weren't as afraid of retaliation from the others. I know it still happens, but I think it's gotten better. I'd like to believe it's gotten better, I guess. PREA doesn't handle everything. It does a great job, but it doesn't fix everything. One of the things I personally don't like about it is you're entitled to services while you're incarcerated. Once you leave, too bad. And not everybody has a great support system like I had, or a spouse with insurance that allowed me to get counseling. And we're messing up a whole lot of people still. I would love to see that changed. I would love to see someone who's been assaulted or raped while incarcerated to have the help that they need for as long as they need it. I work a lot with a few really close jails. One of them is great. They follow it, they accepted it as this is a good thing. Whereas too many of the jails and prisons hate PREA. I remember when I went to Pittsburgh to speak at the Women's in Corrections Conference. My husband and I met some corrections officials from Ohio, and talking back and forth, and oh, where are you from? What do you do? And I said, well, I'm here to talk about PREA. Oh, PREA. I think it's a 4-letter word. And my husband looked at him and said, PREA is mostly common sense, which it is. It starts with, it's not okay to rape somebody. When you're a prisoner, you lose your rights. You lose your dignity. You lose everything. But you still have those human rights that says it's not okay for anybody to hurt you. In the event that, something does happen and the incarcerated person ends up in the hospital, I've been there for a lot of the exams. It's the worst time in their life, and they don't have any family there supporting them. They might just have me. And I am bound determined to make them understand this is not their fault in any way, shape, or form, any more than it's a woman walking down the road's fault. Rape is not about sex. Rape is about power. And unfortunately, some of the corrections officials and the people working in our prisons and jails, and a lot of the inmates, think they have to exercise power. And that's what rape is. It's a power. And PREA gives back some power to incarcerated people. They now know what they can do if something happens, and people have to listen to them. Whereas before PREA, like in my case, if I'd said something, oh yeah, they'd have done an investigation, all right. but all sexual investigations were supposed to be finished within 21 days. And they weren't. They never were. If I'd have said somebody, it had dragged out and dragged out. And in the end, nothing would have happened to them. Those are some of the things that we have to work on. We also have to stop making the victims feel like they're wrong. I know a couple of the jails I work with thought when something happened, the best place to put the person who'd been assaulted was in ADSEG so that they weren't around anybody and they'd be safe. That's the worst thing you can do. Because for one, everybody looks on ADSEG as a punishment. Why should they be punished? Because they were raped. They shouldn't. They normally, when you're in ADSEG, as you all know, you lose your rights, your mail, your personal items, everything, your phone calls, at a time when they need them more than ever. I hate the fact that the jails and prisons charge so much money for phone calls. I firmly believe that they should all be free. A lot of people can't afford the cost of a prison phone call. And you need to have that contact and that stability from your loved ones. And I know a couple of the girls I was in prison with got a phone call once a month. That was it. Because their family couldn't afford it anymore. I don't have a problem with them recording them. I do have a problem with not everybody has access to counseling if it happens. One of the jails I worked with has set up a hotline with a local rape crisis center. But you don't have to have been raped while you were in the jail. If you have a history, if you come from domestic violence, if anything, if for any reason you have a sexual or some type of, what's the word I'm looking for? Horrible event in your past, a lot of trauma, you can use that hotline. It is not recorded. Nobody knows you're using it. But it lets them talk it out. And that's what you have to be able to do. You have to be able to talk it out. I know some of the jails have problems with like sexual assault counselors coming in to talk to people. Because once the other prisoners figure out, oh, that's the sexual assault counselor person. So if you're talking to them, also if they were raped by a corrections official and they see them talking to them, then they're going to know they told. Maybe they didn't report it up the chain in the prison, but they told somebody. That's what's hard about that. That's why I'm a firm believer in the hotlines, free hotlines. And I think there should be a poster hanging above every phone with a phone number to a free hotline. And you can call it anytime and talk to somebody. PREA is a lot of, like I said, common sense, but it's also a lot of following things up the chain. We don't just, yeah, we investigated, we didn't find anything. It's a lot of note keeping, record keeping, note-taking, which is needed. It really is, because we have to know that it's going to be properly investigated. The days of the old Officer A gets accused of raping prisoner 32. He gets in trouble. They give him a couple of days off. So Officer B and C are mad. So they're going to go mess with prisoner 32. I think PREA has gone a very long way in stopping that. We need to have more background checks, I think, better background checks, better psych evals done on a lot of the prison employees, whether it's the corrections officials, whether it's the, office staff, the nurses, the doctors, the teachers. I know here where I'm at, we had some issues with Aramark, which was doing the food, having affairs with some of the incarcerated people. Having an affair with someone who's incarcerated is not okay. The incarcerated person will be reaching out for any human contact. I know we had several of the girls I was in with who were having affairs with some of the prison officials, the guards, the yard keepers and things. And we're going to be together when I get out. No, you're not. He's going to go back to his wife, And to me, that's rape, because they know they're not going to be with him. Not only are they cheating on their spouse, they're doing more damage to the incarcerated person, because they are letting them think we're going to be together and everything's going to be fine. We need to make people realize that just because you're an incarcerated person and you've lost your rights, you still have your human rights. You still have the right to be treated like a human. You still have the right to be safe. It breaks my heart whenever I am following up with someone who's been assaulted in a jail and they think their life has ended. I can personally tell them it's not, but not everybody can, because as much as you empathize with them and sympathize with them, you haven't been there. You do an amazing job, but I can look them in the eye and say, I can tell you firsthand, it does not have to ruin your life. A lot of the prisons, especially, in my opinion, don't feel like the incarcerated people have any rights. They don't feel like they're people. They're just prisoners. I remember during our trial, there was a reporter there from a local newspaper. And every time she talked about me, it was Jan Lastocy, ex-court clerk. What did that have to do with anything? That's not why I went to prison. She also printed everyone of our names in the paper. And I cornered her and said, I thought newspapers, this was back when we still read papers every day. I said, what happened to not printing a rape victim's name unless they wanted it? Well, you were just prisoners. You're state property. I can print your name. And I said, well, for your information, I'm off parole. I'm no longer state property. So no, you can't. She'd already done it more than once, but it upset me to the point I called her editor. And he kind of just blew me off. I believe it was the local prosecutor that then went to her editor, and she ended up losing her job. And unfortunately, that's what our society does a lot, is they treat incarcerated people differently. Like I said, some of the no go. Sorry. Some of the people seem to, there's the old don't drop the soap jokes. It feels like I'm constantly fighting on social media with people who think it's okay if you get raped in prison. And I don't know how anybody can think that it's okay. One of the officers said when I was in intake going into prison, you're not bad people. You're just people who made a bad mistake and got caught. Because there's a lot of people that have done things that have just never gotten caught. And I know my husband, in his job at our local road commission, works with the work release crews from our jail. And some of the other employers are like, but they're prisoners. And he'll look at them and go, the only difference between them and you is they got caught and you didn't. We all know somebody who's done drunk driving and hasn't gotten caught. It hurts to think that so many people this day and age still think that because you're a prisoner, you're a horrible human being. It hurts to know that so many people think if you got raped in prison, it's no big deal. It hurts to know that there are men and women who are suffering every day because they've been raped and they have no one. JDI does this card writing thing every Christmas, and they send cards in to survivors that are still in prison. And I usually do 500 a year myself, and someone can get 3 or 4 cards. Some just get one. It, varies. But to then get a letter from JDI or a phone call saying a certain incarcerated person reached out and said, thank you, Jan. The holidays are hard when you're locked up. And a lot of times people are ready to commit suicide. And then if you've been raped, it's even worse. And a lot of times we get letters or phone calls from incarcerated people saying, That card made me realize I'm not alone. The biggest thing I try to do is make the public aware that prisoner rape happens. I try to, we have to talk about it. We don't talk about it enough. I didn't talk about it. My husband and I just, didn't talk about it to people. Some people wondered where I disappeared to. Our close friends knew, our family knew. He never went into his job and said, "Oh yeah, my wife's in prison." But people find out. But now I'm of the opinion he should have told them all. And he should have told them all that I was raped. Because we need to talk about it. I'm talking about it by telling my story. And I've just written a book. It's going to be published in a couple months, believe it or not. And my editor asked me, why did I write that book? And I said, well, it started out as therapy. My therapist told me, write things down. And I think I'd filled my fourth or fifth notebook. And my husband said, why don't you write a book? So I did. And I told my story. And if that book can help one person who went through this, then it was worth it. That's all I ask, just to help one person and to get the word out, because there are no books out there on this subject. There's one, A Boy Called Fish, from 30 years ago. And we need to talk about it. It needs to be, thank you, Yvette. It needs to be talked about so we can stop it. One thing I've learned, and I think this is extremely important, is the more I talk about it, the more I tell my story, the more I heal. I remember when we had the first trial and it ended in a mistrial, they polled the jury. Every one of them was going to vote guilty. I felt vindicated. And it was like, they believed me. They believed us. And I know when I was working in the circuit court as a court clerk, we had a trial. It was an incest trial. They had traced it back 5 generations. And they wanted not to have the kids testify. And I said, back then even, I think they need to, because I'd been talking to the kids in my office. They just wanted somebody to believe them. That's what we all want, is somebody to believe us. There were 2 women that came from the prison to testify in my case. And unfortunately, we learned that those women were not even at the prison when he was there. They heard about it and just wanted to get out of prison for a couple of days. So yes, people do lie about it, men and women. They lie about everything. But yes, they do lie about being raped. And it truly makes me angry to think that someone could say that the worst thing that you can imagine happened to them when it didn't. It angers me. I would like to see more people who do lie about it charged. I think they need to be. They need to be punished. PREA is not perfect, but it sure does help. If you're one of those people that sees someone at their worst, say you're in the hospital for their exam, just remember they're still a person, and treat them like they're a person. Because being an incarcerated person does not change the way you feel, the way you grieve, the way you cry. I can't imagine being handcuffed to a hospital bed, having an exam. I always try my best to convince them to just stand at the door. Don't handcuff them to the bed. Because you're going through the most degrading, horrific exam that you can imagine. And to be handcuffed to the bed just multiplies it. I'm not always successful, but most of the time I can. One thing that I want to bring up, and I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but there are in the youth facilities, I was very surprised by DOJ's, sorry, my computer wants to be plugged in. I was very surprised by DOJ's documentation in learning that in youth facilities, more of your assaults are done by women. That just blew my mind. To think that so many of our young people are being taken advantage of and hurt in prison by females. It's like our country has lost empathy, and we have to try to remember that kids, adults, whoever, if they're sexually assaulted by another incarcerated person, they're scared of retaliation by them and their friends. As you all know, there's a lot of gangs in prisons, and they're fearful that when they go back, something worse is going to happen to them. They need us, advocates and rape crisis staff and forensic nurses, law enforcement, everybody, to just remember the most important thing. They're still a person. Like I said, it's been 23 years for me. And yes, I suffer from PTSD. I'm still in counseling. Not ashamed to admit it. Writing my book and was great therapy. But then when I had to read it again for editing, it brought back a lot. I truly don't believe you ever get over being raped. Some people try to just bury it and hide it and go on. I have a friend that was in prison that was raped that did that. She never told her boyfriend. She never told her mom. She never told anybody. She hasn't had a decent relationship since. She doesn't get close to people. She's a walking basket case. We need to remember what happened to them was not their fault. I don't care if they were sitting on their bunk in their bra and underwear. It wasn't their fault. Which, of course, we know they couldn't do because they'd get a ticket. But they're taking advantage of someone at their most vulnerable. And we all have the ability to stop it. And I firmly believe that someday we will. I'm hoping it's in my lifetime. I work closely with the PREA Resource Center, and I told one of the girls there that I will keep fighting until there's either no prisoner rape left or I don't have a breath in my body. We need to start using PREA more. We need to start convicting the assailants. They need to start losing their jobs. They need to start going to prison. But again, while they're there, even they don't deserve to be raped. There are a lot of prisons where the COs are extremely overworked, especially since COVID. We all know that nobody wants to work anymore. And there are some absolutely fantastic COs, fantastic ones, and I praise them up and down. Unfortunately, they get a bad mark on their name because of the bad ones. They have a really crappy job, I have to say. Thank you, Margaret. They are watching some of the worst people in our society who are mixed in with some people who made mistakes. And it's going to taint them. But I don't think it changes them to become rapists. I think the power of the people who do it to incarcerated people, the power has gone to their head. And it's just one more way they can exert that power. I remember my rapist saying he liked writing tickets. And when he was in the men's prison in the morning, if somebody didn't like the way that their laundry was folded, he'd write them a ticket. And I'm like, you're messing with these people's lives. Didn't matter. And that's when I started to realize he was just a power-hungry animal. And unfortunately, those are the ones that don't see the incarcerated people as people. He saw them as things. He saw us as things. And I think if you are a CO and you see someone acting like that, I beg you to please report them. You're the closest people to them, and you could be saving somebody's life. I know a lot of people who have been raped in prison have committed suicide. I thought about it a lot when I was in there, but I was too cowardly, to be honest with you. I was too much of a chicken, but I thought about it. besides that, I probably would have only half-assed done it and, you know, been messed up for the rest of my life. We have some fantastic people working in our prisons and jails. Unfortunately, among them, we have some animals. We also have some animals that are incarcerated that think nothing of raping someone. But we can put an end to it. And I like to think that being an advocate and talking to all of you and talking to anyone who will listen helps put this out in the public. And I've gotten to the point now where I don't just talk about it at events or at during a webinar or in front of Congress. I will talk about it to anybody that will listen, because I think we need to tell what's happening. Like I said, I didn't have a clue. I thought it only happened in the movies. We need to make sure people realize that rape is not part of the sentence. Because I distinctly remember when the judge sentenced me, and I know he didn't say he was sending me to be raped. And all of you who support PREA and support the incarcerated people, especially if they've been assaulted or raped, God bless you. You're amazing. I've never met you, but you're amazing. I've met a couple corrections nurses who oftentimes are the first person that an incarcerated person will see after they've been assaulted. And other than the COs who will take them there, but you could make or break them. Simply remembering to treat them as a human is step one, and step two, because that's the most important thing. And to never let them say it was their fault. I know I suffered really bad when I found out that there were 7 other victims in my case, because I was the first one. And I was like, if I would have had the guts to say something and stopped him, then those other women never would have been raped. But I also knew I was doing what I had to do to protect myself. So while my head knew I had done the right thing, my heart had a really hard time dealing with it. And I blamed myself for a long time. And then I realized I wasn't the one that raped them. He was. It wasn't my fault. It was his. And I still struggle with it once in a while, but I think that's just human nature. You know, you feel horrible thinking that because you didn't open your mouth, someone else hurt. But it was no worse than me basically making the decision to let him continue to rape me so I could come home. And there's been a lot I've had to deal with, but I think I'm doing pretty good. I've met some amazing people. Um, I've made, as my husband says, I've made little girls in Congress cry. I've made big, strong corrections officials cry. I'm not trying to make people cry. I'm just trying to make them aware. And awareness is how we're going to stop this problem. Grace, do you want me to keep going? I mean, I can keep talking, or do you want to start doing questions or?
Thank you, Jen. I've been monitoring the chat and looking for questions. So if you're open to receiving questions, I'm happy
Absolutely.
to have that. So if folks feel comfortable typing their questions in either the chat or the Q&A, that would be lovely. There are also some comments for you, Jan, in the chat. But I'll start off with a question.
Okay.
What would you want forensic nurses and advocates to know about working with incarcerated survivors at the time of the exam?
The biggest thing is after that exam is done, they're going back to prison. They're not going to go home to their nice warm bed where they can scream and cry. They're going back to a cold prison. And the only warmth that they may get is from you right there during that exam. Be their friend, be their advocate, and just like I said, treat them like a human being. That's the most important thing.
For our clinicians and therapists in the room, what would you want them to know about working with formerly incarcerated survivors or currently incarcerated survivors?
You don't have to be afraid of us. Most of us are not ex-murderers. You could be walking down the road and pass somebody that just got out of prison. You wouldn't even know it. And this is, like I said, just from my experience, but you are seeing them because they are a rape survivor. Plain and simple. It doesn't matter where they were raped. They were raped. It's a little harder for the still incarcerated ones because they can't do some of the things that somebody in the free world can do. You know, that's why writing is so good. I highly recommend it. Like I said, I wrote and wrote and wrote when I was in prison, and it is healing and helpful, and especially for those who are still incarcerated, if they have access to, you know, a telephone call to a rape crisis line or whatever, tell them to use it, get them to use it. But if they don't, and they're going back into a prison, because we all know that the prisons don't have the greatest mental health. Writing, just tell them to write.
Are there other coping strategies that you can recommend for advocates or clinicians to maybe suggest to folks who are still incarcerated that you found helpful in addition to writing?
I liked it's going to sound really strange. I did it. I've had a couple of the survivors that I work with do it. Go outside, stand in a corner or out in the field by, when you're still in, you have like yard time, they call it. Go out there and just stand and talk to yourself like you're talking to your best friend. You're getting comfort from your best friend. You're getting advice from your best friend. I talk to myself all the time. And what I would do is walk the track and just talk to myself. And, I hated him and I cussed him out there. I could let some of my pent up emotions out. And that's something that they have to be able to do. One thing that works great is screaming. It's difficult in a prison, but I did learn you could take your pillow into the shower, put it up against the wall, the opposite wall, so you didn't get it wet, and turn on the shower and just stand there and scream into your pillow. It's almost like it's freeing. I've recommended that to several of my still incarcerated people I work with. It sounds crazy, but it works. The biggest thing is to get it out some way, whether it's talking to yourself in the yard, whether it's screaming into your pillow, talking to a hotline. Somehow you have to get it out, because if you leave it inside you, it's going to kill you off a little bit at a time.
Thank you. So if you're willing, there's some questions in the chat.
Sure.
One is, do you think there are any trainings that prison staff can take to help people towards preventing this issue, or trainings in general that they can take, things like that?
I know Just Detention International offers a lot of programs and trainings, and so does the PREA Resource Center. The biggest thing is to always be alert and watching, because the inmates as well as the COs know where the cameras are and where they're not. They're not going to do it on camera, but they all know where the camera doesn't record. And maybe make yourself known in those places a little more often. But the most important thing is, if you see it or hear about it or know about it, don't keep it to yourself. We have to start reporting them and stopping this.
The next question, I'm trying to filter these out, is, does PREA work to get people in prison support with mental health issues?
No. Unfortunately, our prisons suck when it comes to mental health. In the 18 months that I was in, I saw a psychiatrist when I first got there, because that was the only way I could get my meds. After that, I saw a counselor twice, and I was supposed to see one every 2 weeks. Mental health in this country as a whole sucks. Between the stigma of having a mental illness and the lack of affordable, proper treatment, people suffer every day. I think that's part of the reason that our suicide numbers are so high. Mental health is a part of life. You probably all know somebody who has a mental illness that you don't know has a mental illness. I myself have bipolar disorder, but if I don't tell you, you won't know I have it. Mine is very well controlled. But No, PREA doesn't go far enough to help with the mental health treatment.
And the next question is from Dina. So of the facilities that you've been working with, which ones have done the best job working with outside rape crisis centers and other support providers? What have they done to set up and maintain those relationships effectively?
The one jail that I work with, I like to use him as an example to everybody. He set up, he's the one that did the little flyers that get handed out to everybody. And your flyer relates to why you're there. They also were the ones that set up a hotline. And you don't have to use that hotline just because something happened to you in the jail. If you have DV, if you have any type of traumatic sexual assault in your past, you can use that hotline. And I think that's fantastic. They have posters all over the jail in intake and by the phones and everywhere talking about PREA, talking about your rights under PREA, but also talking about your responsibilities. And they have been one of the easiest places to work with. In fact, when I first started calling the local jails, I'd say, could I please speak to your PREA coordinator? My what? I'm like, oh. When I called there, they said, sure, just a moment. And it's getting a little better. But too many of the jails and stuff, especially, are small and don't know what to do. Like I work with, I've talked to one of the jails. They're a very small area. He literally has 2 cells, one for men and one for women. He says, so what do I do if I have an LGBT? You know, I don't have any place to put them. They have to go in with the men or they have to go in with the women, you know? So he struggles with that. But I personally find that the jails are more willing to be acceptive of PREA than what the prisons are.
Next question is from Ben. They said, I've seen some advocacy organizations use the term returning/returned citizens to refer to formerly incarcerated. How do you feel about that?
I like that. Maybe it's because I have the, as they call it, the inmate mentality. To me, I was an inmate. It didn't bother me. And then once I was no longer an inmate, I just always referred to myself as formerly incarcerated, or a free person. I was lucky it didn't affect me like it does some people. You know, the question of, have you ever been convicted of a felony? It didn't affect me like it does some people, especially men. Grace, I just had a package delivered. My husband's out there. I'm like, what is he doing? I know some people are upset about being called an inmate or a prisoner. But that's what we were, you know? And an ex-incarcerated person, I just like to say I'm free. You know, but I do like those words that they used.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So if you're okay answering one more question.
Oh, sure.
I know all detention facilities are different, but do you think it's at all possible to advertise PREA services somewhere for incarcerated people to see? If so, any suggestions?
I think every facility, from intake to day rooms to individual cells, I think there need to be PREA posters everywhere with rights and responsibilities, and that will help spread the word, you know? And when you're in intake, you're just sitting there staring at the walls. So why not stare at some posters and read them? Same thing as above the phones, you know? I know some facilities put the phone number up there for like a hotline or something, but put it, put it everywhere. I think it should even be in the lobbies at the prisons and jails so that the rest of the world knows about it. Like I said, this subject is not talked about enough, and it needs to be. And if you put it in the lobby and somebody says, well, what's this PREA? What's it all about? And, people don't know what PREA stands for, and if you say the Prison Rape Elimination Act, well, what does that mean? I know several times when my husband would be talking to the guards that bring out the work crew, somehow they'd get talking about PREA, and they'd always look at him like, how do you know about PREA? And he'd be like, I know a lot more than you think I do. And but it shouldn't be that way, and it's not a 4-letter word, like I said. We have to talk about it. That's the only way we're going to stop it.
That's common sense.
Well, the last question is just, can you share some resources for training for PREA coordinators? And I don't know, you and I are we're happy to pull together relevant trainings. Are there other organizations that you recommend to PREA coordinators for training that you found helpful?
I think the PREA Resource Center is the best. That's where I met Grace, actually. We both took a class there. And I think the PREA Resource Center is the best. And then Just Detention International. Those would be the two. I think they're the only two that do it, to be honest, because the PREA Resource Center is where you go to get auditor training and everything else. And they are so knowledgeable and so helpful. I know I've called them several times when I've had issues with jails, and I'm like, okay, they're telling me this, because I don't know if any of you know how long the standards are, but they're really, really long. And I don't think they might have read the entire thing from front to back, but they sure know them. And I know I've called them several times, and depending on what my question is about, they'll put me through to somebody who specializes in that, and I have an answer in 5 minutes. They are amazing.
Outside of that, I shared Just Detention Center International's letter writing campaign.
Yep. Words of Hope.
Yes. Is there anything within that you would recommend in writing those letters to share with people that would be helpful to hear?
The biggest thing is, if you want to do that, by all means, reach out and do it. It gives you such a feeling. But I always made sure because I didn't write, you don't want to write all the cards the same. But there's one sentence that I included in every single card. You are not alone. You know.
That resource is in the chat. And Jen, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your expertise with the group, and being so willing to answer questions and spend the morning with us. I cannot thank you enough.
Sorry, my TV just popped on.
That's okay. But thank you so much for everything.
Thank you for having me. I like talking about this, and I want it to end. I want us to be part of what makes it go away.
Thank you so much, everyone, and Jan especially. And the evaluations are in the chat. You can complete them anonymously for a certificate of attendance. And thank you again.